My Lords, may I thank the noble Lord Bourne, for introducing this debate. It is indeed timely following the Home Office data published yesterday, which reported a steep rise in religious hate crime. My Lords, such reports are never just about the welfare and health of one group, but more fundamentally, they ask us what kind of society we wish to be. For our community, for my community, when it comes to religious tolerance, we always knew exactly what kind of society this is and what it must be. And that knowledge is profoundly personal. As my name, Kestenbaum, indicates, home until the traumas of the 20th century was Germany. Leipzig and Frankfurt were our origins. So I distinctly remember listening to my grandmother's recollections of our terrified family hiding under the bed on Kristallnacht, 9th of November 1938, almost exactly 80 years ago. The night my family saw every synagogue in Germany, including their own, the renowned Breuer Synagogue, burnt to the ground. The night that discrimination against Jews became the persecution of Jews, and we all know what happened next. So as Europe was poised to exterminate its Jews, thereby committing the greatest crime in all of history, my family fled for their lives, and after a circuitous route, arrived here in Britain. And it was here as a child that we Jews learned the blessing of this country. And that blessing is that this country did not expect you to make a choice between loyalty to one's faith and loyalty to the national interest, whilst both are pursued with dignity. But we also learned one more thing, that when a society turns on its Jews, indeed when a society turns on any faith group, it is always a sign of wider ill health, as shown so graphically in yesterday's report. As the Minister said, paradoxically, it is reports such as these that not only display the shameful aspects of our society, but the best too. For in combating hate crimes, Jews and Muslims have worked together in common cause, with joint endeavours around the security of synagogues and mosques, and more positively, joint endeavours in education programmes in schools to combat religious prejudice. And yet, my Lords, despite all this, the Jewish community of Great Britain, my community, are witnessing something so improbable, so shocking, that it defies belief. And that is the emergence of anti-Semitism out of the shadows, from the margins, and yes, into the political mainstream. For we always knew that whilst anti-Semitism has been a constant lurking menace, it can be contained as long as it is never sheltered under the umbrella of political legitimacy. And though this has never been a political fault line between parties, we've watched with horror as membership of the Labour Party has been infiltrated by those who hate Jews. And its leadership have approached concerns over anti-Semitism in Labour ranks, first with silence, then with denial, then with indignation, and finally what felt like grudging, half-hearted attention, to the point at which the chief rabbi himself, Rabbi Mervis, said that the Jewish community and its concerns have been treated with unprecedented contempt. So, my Lords, with that in mind, and in light of yesterday's report, one might reasonably ask, your noble Lords might reasonably ask, how does it feel to be a Jew in Britain today? And my answer, my Lords, unimaginably, is that Jews in Britain, we, for the first time in centuries, feel anxious, uncertain, and yes, fearful. It is profoundly not what we ever expected this society to be. It is certainly not what we thought would happen to a political party, let alone the Labour Party, whose leadership has become incriminated in fostering a culture of disdain towards the Jews of Britain. For we see daily the online perverted depictions of Jews, perversions which too often go ignored or unchecked. We see the resurfacing of all the old anti-Semitic tropes, the same obscenities, too grotesque to mention, but this time from a place that none of us in this house, on both sides, ever thought possible. It comes from those who call themselves members of the Labour Party. And so, my lords, this has left Jews uneasy, unsettled, and yes, fearful, not least because the social media revolution has given voice to the most extreme, the most vicious, allowing that hatred to be magnified, multiplied, and too often unsanctioned. My lords, it has often been suggested by some on the left that calling out blatant displays of anti-Semitism from the left is a betrayal of the Labour Party. My lords, as my noble friend Lord Hayne indicated, the betrayal is quite the opposite. It is conducted by those who choose to align themselves with anti-Semites, with Holocaust deniers, and then feign righteous indignation when doing so. That is the betrayal, for that has enabled and emboldened the anti-Semites in the Labour Party. It has given them the two things they always craved and were always denied, not least of which by my noble friend Lord Hayne. It has given them space and it has given them a voice. And my lords, ultimately, those who are guilty of ignoring anti-Semitism are those who are personally responsible for the virus spreading. But there is one final outrage, a unique phenomenon which we have never seen in this country, where it is the victim who stands accused rather than the perpetrator. For it is too often said, and you've heard it, that these Jews are exaggerating, they're fabricating, they're in hoc to some extreme right-wing press. And my lords, in those very accusations rest the most potent, the most toxic, the most dangerous 5 words in the English vocabulary, and they are, the Jews are to blame. Consider the unprecedented act last summer, as 68 rabbis right across the community, in good faith and in sorrow, wrote a letter to the Labour Party begging it to adopt the conventional definition of anti-Semitism. And the online frenzy in response to that called for those rabbis' political allegiances to be scrutinized in search of some kind of conspiracy. My lords, let me be absolutely clear. The majority of Jews protesting about anti-Semitism in Labour are anxious about anti-Semitism. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. And it is the online intimidation, along with the offline contempt, which turns that anxiety into fear. So, my lords, this debate provokes the question: what type of society stands up against this new culture of prejudice and discrimination? What must we do? Let me propose 2 simple steps in conclusion. The first is this: if Jews have a heightened attention to the alarm bells of prejudice, there is good reason for that. So symbols matter, allegiances matter, empathy matters, actions matter. And so when the Most Reverend Primate, the Archbishop of Canterbury, goes out of his way to meet Chief Rabbi Mervis at his home on the eve of Jewish New Year to express his concerns personally and sincerely, that matters. It felt as if the Archbishop had visited every Jewish home in the country, and that mattered. Simple acts of compassion and kindness can rebuild trust and mend bridges. And so, my lords, until the leadership of the Labour Party equally finds a way to understand the concerns of Jews in this country, until it can sincerely empathise with those concerns, no amount of party disciplinary procedures, reviews, or organisational restructures will help, For too often, Jewish fears have been met not by empathy and understanding, but by the violence of the online crowd, by cries of smears, and by a political leadership which at the very least has been an enabler. And second and finally, my lords, we must stand together against prejudice, the people of all faiths and of none, those of all parties and of none. For we are all at risk of our common humanity, at risk of our religious freedoms, and above all, at risk of the society that we know we must build together.